baby boomers.
I used to be with it.
Millennials.
Okay, boomer.
Generation X.
What's going on?
And Gen Z. What do they have in common? Not a lot, it turns out. But one thing they can agree on is that this is the political podcast they want to listen to. Welcome to Not My Generation, the political podcast that looks at political events, news, and happenings across the world and at home through a generational lens. Your hosts are Dr. Emily Stacy and Professor James Davenport, two political scientists from Rose State College. But the views expressed on this program are solely the views of the host and their guests and do not reflect the views of Rose State College, its administration, faculty, or students. Coming up on today's program, people found themselves waking up Wednesday morning like, I don't understand. Well, the problem is you don't understand. The problem isn't anything else.
So it's really hard to move away from personality politics, I would say. I mean, I would love to see more policy focus, but I think that's big. Like, you have to educate the public on that.
The social issues, the identity politics that Democrats have been playing for a long time, I'm not saying that those things need to go away, but they have alienated the very voters that James was just talking about.
The power you have does not end at voting.
You know what they say? When things are going in the right direction, the best thing you can do is let them go. And now, here are James and Emily. Good morning, Emily.
Hi, James.
How are you? Exhausted?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Is it Christmas yet?
Oh, my Lord. So much has happened since we were last in the studio. In the fabulous Possibilities, Inc. broadcast studio.
I'm tired. My soul is tired, and much like everybody else out there, I'm pretty sure.
I'm kind of, I'm not so much ecstatic about the election outcome, but I am ecstatic that I won my bet with Dr. Honig over how long it would be before we knew who the president was. So.
I mean, $5 is not really bragging rights, James, but
it's all bragging rights because it's not real money, right? So
true. Even though I was the only one, I guess I should take bragging rights, who correctly predicted what had happened on the podcast. Thank you very much. I was incorrect about the popular vote because who the hell saw that coming? But she did tell you, and had been telling you, dear listeners, for I don't know, T-minus like 9 months at least. That this was not going to go well.
What was going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, in international relations, you know, I'm very much a realist, and we keep it pretty pessimistic.
I did so we made 4 predictions on that previous show, right? You were right about that. I was right about the Senate flipping. And then everybody was wrong about everything else for the most part.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Oh, God. Anyway, before we get into all this, and we've got 2 brilliant students with us to help kind of dissect and take hot takes and, reactions, because we're spiraling. This was supposed to be the introduction, and we're spiraling already into, lamentations and analysis.
But we do have 2 students in the house with us today. You want to introduce them to our audience real quick?
Impressive students, yeah. So one of the many hats that I now wear is very, humbly and very honored to adjunct at Oklahoma City University. And one of my students, Brian O'Keefe, is here with us today. And I am very grateful because he is extremely outspoken in class, doesn't shy away from sharing his opinion, and it was boldly Haktua boy for Halloween. So, if anybody knows Dr. Stacy, she likes a good joke. So that endeared Brian to me greatly. So I asked him to meet us down the street and come to the podcast. And then, of course, a return guest to the podcast, our own Dynasty. And tell me how you say your last name, because I always want, I don't think in the 3 years I've known you that I've actually ever asked you to pronounce it.
It's Puri. It's French. Okay. So it's kind of, yeah.
That was where I was going to go, because I, studied French for 7 years. And so that's where, okay, fabulous. And she is I mean, she's everything, child. I am extremely impressed with this young lady. She is my progeny, if you will. I see myself in Dynasty, and I do hope that, that's my narcissism and my projecting there. Before we get into the election stuff, I would like you, Dynasty, to tell the listeners what you've been up to this semester, because it's been a big year for you. You've done a lot.
I just finished up a busy summer. I interned at Sally's List. I worked with the Oklahoma Democratic Party, and those were both really great opportunities. I also did Oklahoma Policy Institute, which, again, good opportunities, great for networking. And you also just learn so much about Oklahoma politics in general in that area. So that was nice. And then as far as the semester, I was lucky to get accepted into the Oklahoma Academy. Yeah. So they invite students to come and participate in their academy. And there's essentially 5 panels. And so in each of these panels, they write up a report. And basically, they're just there to listen to you as Oklahoma people. And also just most of these people work in politics too, so they know what they're talking about. And this year, our topic was polarization, politics, and primaries. Yes. And so we were just discussing on what we could do better in Oklahoma to kind of mitigate from that. And so it was such a great opportunity, and being there and being able to share my thoughts as a Gen Z student, a lot of the people in my panel were just so amazed about what I had to say about youth engagement and stuff like that. And it was just so nice. And then I'm also in OIL, which is Oklahoma Intercollegiate Legislature. And basically it's a mock government group. And so students all over universities in Oklahoma, so they have a delegation at OU, OSU, Rose State, obviously, and just different schools. And we come together and we're basically like a mock government. So I participate in the Senate, and I'm a senator, and I present bills, and my fellow senators will vote on the bills, and then we just go through business, how it is in government. So it's really nice too. So.
Very cool. And you obviously just came from the Capitol. We're interrupting your very busy days, Senator. Thank you for being here. So impressed with you. It just every opportunity that we give to you, internships, and just anything, you're like a sponge. You take every opportunity, and you're so advantageous. I really, really am so impressed with you. You are going to go far, my love. I'm so proud. All right, James, are you going to interrupt me at any point? Because you're just over here researching. What are you doing?
I'm letting you go. You're rocking it this morning. So
is that?
Why should I interrupt? You know what they say. When things are going in the right direction, the best thing you can do is let them go.
Is that what they say?
That's right.
That's what they say.
That's right.
Okay.
All right. So we want to talk about the election.
Right?
I know you might not want to, but that's what we're here to do. That's our job.
This is a hobby. This is not a job.
You can't escape it, right? So do we want to get reactions from them first, and then we can dive into some of the numbers and look at what we've been able to find out. So let's go there.
All right.
Hot takes. Yeah. All right. What were your thoughts? Were you surprised? Were you not surprised?
Well, I remember that night I was doing so many things. I saw a movie with one of my friends to distract myself from it. And I remember going into it, all the states that were obvious were called. And my friend, one of my friends, he was very adamant about it. We were in our floor lobby, there's a big old TV, and we were streaming CNN, the election. And he was like, Kamala only needs to win X amount of swing states. It's very possible. And then Georgia was called, and he was like, it's totally fine. It's totally fine. We could win all the others. And I was hopeful. I was I'm always it ain't over till it's over. Yeah. So, and then Pennsylvania was called, and he was like, it's okay, Kamala just has to win every other swing state. And I was like, dude, it might be over. And he was like, it's not over. And he did convince me, because I did stay up until 1 a.m. watching all the other states be called. And I think it was almost, and I decided to stay up until for Trump to give his victory speech, quote unquote. Sure. And it was almost like damning to watch him do that. Like it was like, I think the contrast between Kamala's like conceding speech and Trump's I guess victory speech? Yeah. Question mark? Because it wasn't really a speech. He was just like connecting random thoughts together. Like sitting there watching him talking about Elon Musk's rocket for 10 minutes. And I'm just like this is real. I think it was very much like this is real life. And I'm sitting here and I'm watching this and I'm just like, I think that was my first initial thought on it.
Was it painful to watch the states get called?
Yes.
This is so, for context, this is your first election, correct? Both of you are fairly young.
Yeah. I'm 20. I mean, I was 17, 16,
yeah,
17.
You were not legal. Right. This is your first election, Brian. Right. Yes. Okay. So Dynasty, what were your initial reactions?
It was so, honestly, for me, I was kind of surprised. Okay. I was pretty optimistic about it. And just to see the states being called and the results not going how I thought they would, because, obviously some states are going to go towards Trump and stuff like that. But it just kind of made me realize kind of the echo chamber that I was in as far as people who support Kamala, because I swear on Instagram, everybody was I'm voting today, especially on Instagram, I have Gen Z people, younger voters, and everybody was going to vote and everybody was proud to show their voting sticker. And I was okay, Gen Z's actually showing up. But then when the numbers came back especially for Kamala, youth engagement was not there. And so I was just really, really shocked, honestly. And it kind of made me just think about the echo chamber I was in as far as politics. Yeah. But I mean, kind of same thing that he was saying. Trump's speech was all over the place, per usual. Yeah. And I mean, that was just my reaction. It was disheartening, honestly. Yeah. So, yeah.
Sure. I think it's interesting. So you mentioned, and you guys are, pretty much diametrically not opposed, but different institutions, right? Brian's at a private 4-year university. And so they have, the resources that Rose State, a 2-year, publicly funded community college, doesn't necessarily have. And so I think it is interesting that Dynasty said, mentioned the echo chamber, because that was a lot of what my conversation with my OCU students was about versus my Rose State students. I didn't get a lot of that at Rose State, but specifically at OCU, because it is a private campus. Those kids are my God, if they're not athletes, they're performing, the arts kids. And so they are triple booked sometimes. These kids never leave that campus. And so it's sort of this petri dish, right, of their own politics. And it becomes an echo chamber, as Dynasty mentioned. And so I thought that was an incredibly interesting part of the conversations that I had in both of my OCU classes on Tuesday. Just sort of getting their reactions was, my God, I didn't realize, how entrenched I was in progressive liberalism here on this campus for me to be that surprised by the result. And so I thought that was very poignant.
That is an increasing criticism of higher education. Sure. Broadly, is that it continues to insulate itself from the broader public, of which it's supposed to serve. Sure. And you see some of this divergence in how people voted. So if you had a college education, 56% of those with a college education voted for Kamala Harris, right? But 56% of those without a college education voted for Donald Trump. Right. And the problem for Democrats is there's a lot more people without college education than with. Right. And so, yes, it's very easy. And even on our campus, if we were to do a survey of faculty, certainly in our division, they're going to be much more left-leaning than the public is. And so, if people found themselves, I'm just going to say, if people found themselves waking up Wednesday morning I don't understand. Well, the problem is you don't understand.
Yeah.
The problem isn't anything else.
Yeah.
Right.
The temperature was off, I think, and you know, I've been railing about it this entire time. It's lovely to see the enthusiasm, the momentum, et cetera, but that does not equate to turnout. It doesn't bring people out to vote. It may bring people out to a rally to see Beyonce, right? But it's not. It doesn't mean that millions of people are going to turn out and vote. And I think that was, and particularly how definitive it was and how quick, as you mentioned, your little bet with Dr. Honig, how quick it was, because I was actually on the side of Dr. Honig. I was really sure that by Friday we would still not know the answer. So I'll eat it with him. You're not getting $5 from me. However,
How about $2.50?
based on 2020 and, the stacking of lawyers and the, he had already filed charges before the election. On election day. And so
it was clear that if it had went the other way,
exactly.
This was going to be drug out in court.
Even on election night, he was talking about Pennsylvania being really questionable up until the point where they called every county but Harrisburg.
Do you find it interesting that all of the accusations of voter fraud and just melted away, right? Totally. All of a sudden just disappeared. Right. Apparently it could only be one way. One thing that's interesting as well is the youth vote itself, right? So you look at voters age 18 to 29, a lot of people were expecting that turnout to heavily fall in favor of Harris. Not so much.
She didn't even garner as much of the youth vote 18 to 29 as Hillary Clinton did in 2016.
Yeah, that was shocking.
That's problematic.
51%. Trump got 47. So not a huge split there, right?
Yeah.
Now you go to the older age groups. They didn't break that much heavier for Trump. There's just more of them, right? So you've got 65 plus, 51% went to Trump, 48 went to Harris. Yeah. Kind of my age range, 45 to 64, 52 went to Trump, 46 went to Harris. So you see that age breakdown. So, but it just wasn't. You didn't see in those younger age groups, early or older Gen Z. Millennials did not break heavily in Harris's favor, right? Yeah.
Again, even in my generation, 30 years to 44, the millennial generation, she was down 9 percentage points from Hillary Clinton and down 5 from Joe Biden in 2020. So, this is a long-standing problem for the Democrats. This is not. So, look, and we can get into all of the analysis momentarily, but I'm going to say what I'm going to say. This was not a Kamala Harris problem. This was number one, a circumstantial problem. I don't think that she could have run a better campaign. Mm-hmm. Honestly, she was, as I mentioned at the conference, she was not the person. She was not the candidate, as I've been talking about for almost a year now, as we pontificated whether or not Joe Biden should back down, who would be next, and whether or not she was viable. You know where I stood on this issue the entire time. In fact, I chided Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison about this when we had him on, because I just was not convinced that we were ready to vote for her. I am, but this is more long term, right? This is when you have Black men under the age of 45 breaking for Donald Trump, almost doubling their support for him. Latino men moving from 34% to 56% from 2020 to 2024 in terms of Trump. This is not the social issues, the identity politics that Democrats have been playing for a long time. I'm not saying that those things need to go away, but they have alienated the very voters that James was just talking about. Those folks in the rural areas where they used to vote Democratic, those working class blue collar families where they used to vote Democratic, those folks with just GEDs, high school educations, they used to vote Democratic. So at what point did the Democratic Party become this elitist ivory tower nonsense, right? It's become problematic. And I don't know that the Democratic Party can really center its way out of this, right? That was a lot of more of the critique of Harris, was that parading around Liz Cheney, that excites people like you and me, right? That excites us, but that didn't do a thing for these kids, right? For Gen Z, they saw that.
Like, who's Liz Cheney?
Well, number one, but then when they looked her up and realized that her dad was Dick Cheney, they were like, what's happening here, right? Because these kids are more on the AOC progressive side of things. And so the Democrats cannot continue to run from the center whenever the right is running from the far right and sweeping the nation. I don't know how the party moves forward, honestly.
Here's the thing. Harris, my analysis of Harris is, we talked about this at OPSA of moving to the center. I think a couple of things. It didn't work for a couple of reasons. Number one, the people she was trying to convince weren't convinced that she was being genuine. Yeah. But on the other side, the people on the very far left of her party were very convinced it was genuine, and they didn't like it.
They hated it. Yeah.
So rather than adding to her coalition, so to speak, she detracted from it, right? But I think we have to be careful, right? So, college educated young people are very much more progressive. Sure. Non-college educated young people, not so much, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
So we've got to, and yes, if the Democrats want to be competitive in 2028 and beyond, they're going to have to figure out how to get back to attracting those. You could call them working class. I don't particularly like that term, but you can call them working class. You can call them non-college educated, whatever term you want to call them. They need those folks if they're going to win elections. Yeah. And right now they're bleeding them, and they're bleeding them across the board, not just among whites, but among blacks, as you mentioned, Latinos, whatever demographic you want to look at. Yeah. Harris performed measurably lower with all of those groups than Biden did including women than Biden or Clinton in some cases, right? Yeah. If you just look at, Trump's performance increased, he had 2016, his performance in 2020 outpaced his performance in 2016. Mm-hmm. And in 2024, it outpaced his performance in 2020.
And he finally won the popular vote, which was so important to him.
Well, and the one thing it does is it doesn't give anybody a chance. Yeah, it doesn't give anybody a chance. Oh, well, this wasn't a real, kind of a thing. Yeah. No. I think it is important. I think he
sees it as a popularity contest. You know what I mean? And not the political gravity that it actually holds.
You are exactly right. It was important for him. For vanity, there you go, right? For vanity purposes, that he got that he could say, "Hey, look, the American public loves me," and whatnot, right? Yeah. But if you look, he did get about 1.8 million more votes in 2024 than he got in 2020. By contrast, Harris got about 8 million less than Biden did in 2020, right? And there were about 6.3 million fewer votes cast overall than in 2020. Wow. So now, I think it's going to be interesting to find out what was the drop off. Yeah. Why did so many people just decide, you know what, I'm sending this one out? Is it, you know what, things sucked under Trump, things sucked under Biden, doesn't matter, I'm sitting this one. It could be that. It could be that, neither candidate necessarily inspired, confident. It'll be really interesting to see what was going on with that group of folks who just decided not doing it this year.
And you two both voted, correct?
I did vote, yes.
Yeah. How did you arrive at, and you don't have to disclose, but how did you arrive at your decision making, your ultimate decision?
Well, I hate Trump. Yes, I mean, I'm not gonna beat around the bush and be like, well, I think that's like where a lot of people who voted for Harris, it was like, I was reluctant to do so, but it was like, okay, but like Trump is like so obnoxious and is just such like, I like throw up in my mouth, just like thinking about the idea of voting for him. And I think ultimately that's why I voted for Harris, but it's also like, I wasn't like, I didn't like watch Harris's campaign and I wasn't like inspired or moved by it, which is also think why she might have lost, you know? And I also like another thing that I found interesting is that like so many people my age at my college just did not vote.
Yeah.
And was just like, oh, I didn't really want to register. It seemed like too long of a process. And I'm just like, what? Like that is insane to me. Like, it's like, how do you not like care at least a little bit, you know? Like, and like people argue that like, oh, your vote doesn't count, but it's just,
But it does.
It so
Especially
does
at the state and local level.
Yeah, definitely. And for like referendums and things, you know, like it's so important. And the fact that people didn't see that was kind of shocking to me.
Yeah. I'm going to send you out as an advocate, my friend. How did you arrive, Dynasty, at your decision?
Kind of the same thing, my dislike for Trump. But at the same time, I did want to, be fair about it. And I feel like Kamala, obviously, I would love to see like a Black woman in office. So that played a part into my decision. But you also got to think about like the issues and like that both candidates, where they stand on it. And so I thought about it in that way, too. And I feel like certain issues are geared towards certain candidates. So the economy is like, people are more in favor of Trump when it comes to that. And so I definitely wanted to do my research and make sure I knew what I was like voting for when it came to that aspect. But no, I was like full support of Kamala. And after I like covered all, like, she's probably like not my favorite, like she's not a perfect candidate basically, but between them both, like I was her 100%. Yeah. And that's how I arrived at my decision.
So I've got one last question, then I'll let Dad over here take over. But I do want to ask you guys, because you are younger voters going forward. And again, this was sort of the first campaign that you guys fully participated in. What do you hope going forward, and for either party or maybe multitudes of parties, who cares? Do you hope that candidates run more on policy versus personality, or are you okay with the sort of personality politics that's kind of taken over?
I feel like it's hard to get away from personality politics. You know what I mean? Especially when, again, a lot of the population, like we do have college educated folks who do care about policy and how it's going to affect us in the long term. But when you're seeing about two candidates, which one's like more like strong or comes off more personable, and who do you think can lead the country better in like just that standpoint? And people look at it as that. So it's really hard to move away from personality politics, I would say. But I mean, I would love to see more policy focused, but I think that's big. Like you have to educate the public on that. So once we educate the public, then I think, more people would be open into how the policies actually affect us. Because again, like with campaigns, obviously, like people will speak on where they stand, but sometimes people don't know how, like, yes, it may work this way, but it also has this unintended consequence or, there's loopholes and all of that. So it's really big on education, but I think for right now, like it's hard to shift away from that.
So I think a really good anecdote to your point there is the most searched Google search the day after the election was, what is a tariff? Right? And so like, so we voted for Trump, and then
you might have wanted to do that search before election day, not after.
Brian, policy or personality?
I mean, I feel like to some degree, like if you're policy oriented, that is your personality almost, right? Like, like, I don't know. I feel like Obama was so like, that was his personality was being policy oriented. And that also like, then that's how Trump became. That was his thing, was basically the opposite of Obama, That's true. And like, I think as a young voter, as a young liberal voter, I think I look at the two parties and I see them both on the right side of things. And it's very like, it's sad. It makes me sad because it's like, I want to vote for someone who's more progressive and someone who's more of an advocate for change. But like, I don't think the Democratic Party is going to.
Not the way it's constituted right now.
No, definitely not. And it's very unfortunate. It makes me sad. But also, like, I don't know. I mean, things can change, and in 4 years maybe they will lean towards something.
Or in 2 years, right? We've got midterm elections in 2 years, sir, which are way more impactful than in 4 years.
Well, and especially if Trump and the Republicans in Congress misread what this election, right? If it's like we're going to push aggressively on all of these fronts, they might find out that all those voters that they had this year are like, nah, that's not really what we were saying, right? And so that will be interesting. And quite frankly, both parties have done that in recent history, right? I squeak out a victory and I've got a mandate to jam everything I want down everybody else's throat, right? And that doesn't really work. And you tend to get midterm elections that give huge pushback. And we can go all the way back. Clinton in 94 gets killed in the midterms. Bush in 2006 takes it on the chin. Obama in 2010. And then Trump and also Biden in their midterms and their first terms had the same thing, right? Because we're gonna be as aggressive as we can, and maybe long term that's not the right play, right? Maybe long term it's let's take what we can get the public behind. And then build on that.
And win consecutive elections. I feel like, and this is another conversation I've been having quite a bit with students, and it's following a global trend is, we are not retaining incumbents. We are looking at the current politics, particularly economic politics. We're looking at it, blaming the current president rather than looking back at economic policy, because does the economy change as soon as a president takes office? Whenever the inauguration happens,
I just want to remind everybody who's ever preferred president comes out and gets a piece of legislation passed, and all of a sudden in 6 months or something, things turn up, and it's like, see, we told you. No, it doesn't work that way, right? It can take many years before. Listen, we're still arguing over the impact of the New Deal on the Great Depression, so it's not like all of this stuff is clear cut as to what happens. And, there are some of us who have stronger opinions than others about that. But yes, the reality is it's going to take a few years to figure out and a president may be out of office, right? So Biden's going to leave, and then we'll start getting good, solid data about any of this stuff that happened. Yes, exactly. and to what extent, right? And this is all right, in politics, you almost have to follow a certain fallacy of thinking, which is this happened and then this happened, therefore this caused this, right? Because that's how you either take credit or you place blame, right? But in social science, that's not what we do.
Causation is not correlation.
That's right. And so we have to look deeper and find out to what extent any of these decisions actually impacted what is happening now. And it's just going to take time to do that. So yes, but that's not how politics work. It's part of the challenge that we have in being able to evaluate elected officials, right? And by the way, since we have a couple of young, as us old folks say, a couple of youngsters in the house.
Don't be creepy.
Do we want to talk about Social Security at all?
Jesus. Sure. Why not?
Because it's about to run out of money.
Yeah. Right. Let's piss them off before we send them out. Why not? Feeling froggy today.
And nobody's talking. Listen, nobody wants to address that 800-pound. That is the single largest program that we have in the country. And for those who don't know, we've talked about this before, right? We have a dedicated Social Security tax that's paid to fund it. It's projected that in about 2032, 2033, the taxes that we collect will not be sufficient to pay out the obligations. And at that point, you only have a couple of options. You either cut benefits.
My money back. Give me my money back. Thank you, government.
Yeah, right. That ain't happening. You can either cut the benefits that you pay out. Right. And remember who's the largest voting bloc in the country, right? They ain't going to take that real well. You can take it out of the general revenue. So you take money away from national defense, criminal justice, education, health and safety. Take money away from those to fund that retirement program. Right. Or you can try to raise the Social Security tax in some way to collect more revenue, right?
God, what would they raise?
Well, they would just we raised
tax?
it in the 80s, right? So they faced this thing in the 80s, and they created some structural changes that pushed the insolvency date, if you will, back, right? So they raised the retirement age from 65 to 67, and they raised the Social Security tax from, I think, 4% to 6.25% now that we have, right? The problem is none of that's super popular.
I mean, right?
Right? Nobody's going to, if I'm getting close to, so they will have to do it in a way that if you're like within 5 or 10 years of retirement, you still can retire at the normal age. Everybody else is going to have to work a couple of years longer or whatever, right? Or they're going to raise the tax, and that's going to impact lower income young people far more than anybody else, because for those folks, that's in many cases, that's the largest tax they pay is Social Security taxes, right? So
that's revolution.
You got me. I don't know what they're going to do, how they're going to bite the bullet to get this done. But the closer they get to that date, the fewer options they have to do anything, right? I will say, those of us who are think about this from a couple of different ways. One thing that they could do to help solve that problem, make immigration easier, get more workers, because that's the basic problem is we have fewer workers supporting a larger retirement base, right? You want to turn that around, bring more workers in. So that could certainly help in one way or the other, but that's none of these are popular.
You're not going to. So for you, the deal is, how are they going to fix it to where folks that are 10 years out, it's not going to adversely, right? I
have no idea.
Hurt you guys, but then how do you make it solvent for me whenever I'm, 30 more years of working out?
I think most in my age bracket have tried to assume that it's probably not going to be there.
Oh, I know it's not. I tell my kids all the time.
Some other way of preparing for retirement. Yeah. I'm not a person who thinks about retirement very much. I love working. I love doing stuff. But there'll be a time when I at least want to reduce the amount of work that I do, right? That I want to taper back some. And will Social Security be there? I'm not betting on it.
No, and for you two, like I said, this is like French Revolution type of stuff. I would be angry, and I am angry because it's likely not going to be there for me. And I've been paying into this since I was 16, right? Since I started working, I've been paying into payroll taxes, been paying into SSI, been paying into all this nonsense. And
if anybody's ever been in one of my classes, they will have at some point heard me rant about how Social Security screws over young people in a variety of ways. But the reason nobody fixes that is because you guys don't vote.
That's right.
Regularly, right?
That's right.
You two might, but your age group, they don't.
That's right.
They don't show up.
The older folks that do,
and they vote religiously.
By God, they're going to get their medicine. They're going to get what they need, which is fair, right? That's what they've been promised.
In a democratic process, it's the people who show up and vote who get what they want, right? And I think that's just one of the issues that's coming down the pike. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see. So. What about some of these nominations?
I was going to say, so maybe that'll be a great job for Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to tackle with the Doge office.
Right.
The Department of
Government
Efficiency, which you don't typically put the O in the acronym, but they're doing it to be cute because, of course, the Bitcoin, like Doge, anyway, whatever. Yeah. I think at this point that that I am an adjective that I'm not going to say on air for like plausible deniability, but like as soon as that name came out, I melted into the floor, and then it just like continued. Headline: Florida man becomes attorney general. That's a meme, right? That's a meme somewhere, right? Matt Gaetz is as qualified. Like, I think you should go be attorney general, right? And that's not an insult. I honestly think that you are more qualified than Matt Gaetz. I feel, and I hope that this is part of some, as Fetterman said yesterday, some like godlike trolling on Trump's part.
Right, yeah.
And he's dangling, the like worst parts of humanity in front of us so that whenever he actually makes some nominations, he's like, okay, cool. It could have been this.
Could have been this. And yeah. So
where are we? I feel like I'm just catatonic. And
here's what's going to be interesting. Will the Senate just roll over for all of these folks? Yeah. And there have been a couple of senators who kind of have been like, they're not so sure. The Gaetz, especially on the Gaetz thing. Yeah. But I just don't know how many of those are going to be willing. That's the thing. All the people who've been willing to confront Trump have been kicked out of the party, for the most part, right? There aren't that many of them left.
So I think we got lucky on Wednesday, whenever the Senate did their leadership vote to replace Mitch McConnell, who has been buffering for a really long time now. There were 3 contenders, John Cornyn from Texas, Rick Scott from Florida, which would have been horrific. But the one who ended up as majority leader is John Thune from South Dakota. And I think that he is the best bet of the 3. Rick Scott, obviously a Trump shill.
He came out and basically said, Trump won. We're going to give him what, if I'm a majority leader, we're going to give him what he wants.
And so, I mean, overwhelmingly, the caucus denied Rick Scott. Yeah. And I was a little bit on the fence about John Cornyn. He has been critical and he's more of a moderate kind of Tom Cole conservative, but he's also in more recent months sort of sidled himself over to the MAGA side. I think that Thune respects the sanctity of the Senate and its authority. I would be surprised if Thune, who seems to be a pretty strict constitutionalist, abdicates the Senate's advise and consent authority and allows for Trump to just make recess appointments. I'd be really surprised. That's
going to be an interesting fight too, right? As to how extensively Trump will be able to get away with using recess appointments to get some of these folks too. But yeah, I have not been overly impressed. So you've got the Gaetz, you've got the RFK Jr. going to head up. You've got some other folks. I don't have a huge beef with Marco Rubio.
I don't either.
He has become more Trump friendly than I would like, but he's still kind of a more traditional Republican.
I'm okay with Marco Rubio. He is palatable.
Yeah. But
he was more palatable to me as an IR scholar than John Bolton was, certainly. Right. John Bolton was like Satan incarnate for international relations students in the early war on terror. I don't know.
So this is going to be interesting to see how all of these nominations play out. Apparently our own Senator Mullen did not make the cut.
No, he did not.
Interior.
There's always ag,
which
though,
would
right?
Have been, there is that,
oh, yeah.
right? And,
that was my first thought. There's always ag.
And it'll be interesting if he's interested in actually making that jump, right? There's a lot of safety in being a U.S. Senator, right? Re-election rate for those folks is really high. In Oklahoma, he's safe as long as he wants that job.
I think he'd be. I think that he has those ambitions, but unlike Kevin Hearn, he is way more politically methodical and more calculated about the moves that he's making. Hearn is much more opportunistic and advantageous. He's running for policy chair in the Republican caucus in the House against against the sitting one for the last decade. There's just a lot of hubris there.
Rumor has it he might be eyeing a governor's race in a couple of years.
I know. Again, the hubris there.
I'm like, who's Hearn? I know who he is, right. But outside of his congressional district, does anybody really know?
Look, he's going to spend a lot of that McDonald's franchise money on a race that he's not going to win against Gittner Drummond. And others in that primary. That primary is going to be stacked.
It is going to be a tough primary, and you've got so. Is Ryan Walters going to become Secretary of Education, or is he going to run for governor? Is he going to do both?
I need you to not. Peaches, can I get a paper bag to breathe into? I'm kidding.
Listen, I'm just wondering how far up Trump's posterior. He's going to shove his head.
Oh, well, we heard from a good journalist friend that he was shunned, Walters was effectively, or sort of ignored. Maybe shunned is maybe too strong of a word, but ignored by Trump effectively at the convention.
Yeah, I'd like to know more about that.
Right. And so, but he is certainly bending over backwards to wave the flag. He really wants that Secretary of Education job. There
would be
I'm speechless about it. I can't.
You know, I know a lot of people are like, please let him go, right? But
don't let him go.
You know, let him become the nation's problem and not Oklahoma's.
We saw how well that worked out with Scott Pruitt, though.
Hey, I'm just going to say, if that were to happen, you might find a lot more progressives are like, yes, close down the Department of Education. I'm just saying.
Oh my goodness.
You know,
you
it's
might.
like, you know, there might be some alignment there.
Although that might be good. Another thing that was floated at OPSA was the possibility of Mark McBride running for Board of Education. Oh, that you were on a panel at that point, but
I would
love
that he probably will, especially if Walters is not
moseyed away.
Right?
Yeah. I think that would be an excellent move for Oklahoma. We love communication that goes both ways, not just you listening to us pontificate. We would love to hear from our audience. If you have comments, suggestions, or would like to contact us about possibly being a guest on the show, please email notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu.
We'll watch that, but I would almost bet that
we've been talking too much.
Setting himself.
Ask the children a question. But yeah, I agree with you.
Anybody? Hey, so this is a state level question. Anybody pay attention to the judicial retention argument debate on that?
You probably got a ton of text messages.
Yes.
I'm not from the state of Oklahoma. I'm originally from Missouri, and I'm a freshman, so I've only lived here for like 3 months. But so I don't know much about that.
I paid attention to it somewhat. I wish I paid a little bit more attention, but yes, I voted yes on it because of just
for
the
all
judge.
Three of them?
Yes.
Okay.
And they've also, like, a lot of the commercials, like, I literally be watching YouTube in my room and they're like, vote no, because they're like this and that. And they're very extreme commercials compared to like just the judges they are, and they're Democratic judges. So of course it's to the benefit of the governor to be able to replace them. And so, yeah, I mean, and also just like tribal relations, there was somebody talking about it, and that's really important for them considering the governor we have, for those judges to be retained. And, you know, it just kind of sucks that wasn't the outcome. So
yeah, I don't know. That was a weird race. We've not, again, and we talked about this at OPSA. It was an unprecedented, number one, having one of the justices not be retained, Cogar, the oldest one, which we, probably think, a lot of the age politics from the national level bled into that race. But yeah, I agree with you. The commercials were extremely, they're too woke for Oklahoma, blah, blah, blah. And, let's be clear. They were put on the court or nominated by a Democratic governor. However, their idea, Norma Gurich ran as a Republican back in the good old days.
Republican. Yeah.
So
I don't know if she still is.
Right. We don't know because we're not supposed to.
At the time she was nominated, she was still a registered Republican.
Right. Yeah. So I just, we need to be careful with that. I want to congratulate her on her retention. I will be reaching out to her soon.
Yeah. It was very narrow. Right.
Very.
So
at one point they were not.
They were not. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
It was close.
I'm convinced the only reason Edmondson survived, or at least survived at a higher rate than Gurich, is his last name.
Yeah.
Cogar, 87 years old. I mean, I think that played into a lot of people's votes right there. She's the only one that wasn't retained. But here's what I'm going to say, right? This is the first time that we've had a judicial retention ballot that I actually knew anything about the judges.
That's
anything
fair.
At all.
Yeah.
Good and bad, sure. Right? So you had one group running the negative ads, you had another group running positive ads. I knew more about these judges than I've ever known when I've casted a vote for before, right?
Yay, dark money, question mark?
So, yeah, right. I'm going to say that's who we have to thank for that, is dark money groups, because they're the ones that put the information out. And so I would much rather, listen, I'm not in favor of retention ballots to begin with for judges. I think that's a horrible mechanism. But if you're going to have it, right? And this was my complaint about some of the criticisms of people saying, oh, you shouldn't be doing this. It's like, if you're going to have a democratic process for retaining these judges, you don't get to criticize people for engaging in the democratic process. That is totally unfair, right? And and what it basically says is we want people voting, but we don't want them to have any information on the people they're voting for. That makes no sense.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And so I didn't mind. I liked having more information, and I can make my decisions accordingly, right? As opposed to just throwing a blind vote. Well, I haven't heard anything about them, and okay, they haven't been in a scandal, so I guess that's okay. Or I haven't, I know some people. There are a few people who are like, I just vote no all the time because I don't know anything about them. So I appreciated having the additional information, and yeah, we have dark money groups to thank for that. So, which I hate that term anyway, but anyway.
I know.
And it was interesting at OPSA. So I was on a panel just talking about the election stuff in general. And Pat Hall is on it. So you guys don't know who Pat Hall is, but Pat Hall is a longtime Democrat operative. He's been the executive director of the Democrat Party chair. He's ran campaigns in Democrat politics. He lobbies, all of that. He was in that panel, and then Rick Farmer from OCPA was in there. And so there was some pretty good, except Rick Farmer, Rick Farmer, he's not going to take anything personally or be offended by too much. But Pat Hall was helping run the dark money campaign supporting the judges, right? And so it was interesting to hear from him. And I did. And while I was on there, I said, thanks, Pat, for giving me some information. I appreciate your groups getting out there and doing something. Whether or not I voted the way they wanted me to, I appreciated that they gave me some information on which to base a decision. What else? Okay, so going forward, we're going to have a slew of nominations. We're going to see what the Senate's going to do with these things. The House, it looks like Republicans are going to retain a very narrow majority. They might have picked up one or two seats by the end of the day, but it's still going to be very narrow, which means, that handful of folks are going to make problems in the House for, right, the what we used to call the Gates 8 or whatever, right? And now Freedom Caucus types or whatever, but they're gonna have outsized influence in that chamber. Still, it'll be interesting to see how Johnson so far has found a way to get some stuff done without having them revolt on him,
which is interesting. I wonder how long that's going to last.
Here's what I found. As I was going through when the whole McCarthy removal thing was happening. Democrats and Republicans, at least those Republicans that were moving to oust him, had a very similar complaint about McCarthy, which was you can't trust him to keep his word in negotiations. And so, had he wanted to go to Democrats to try to retain his speakership, they're like, no, we're not going to say because we can't trust you either, right? So at least Johnson has credibility in that he's not going to agree to something that he can't agree to, and he's not going to overpromise and then get himself in trouble. At least up to this point, right? We'll see what happens. I am concerned that they're just going to try to cram as much as they can in these next 2 years before voters have a time to react, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Let's give the kids the final word.
What do you think?
Just about what we talked about?
Yeah, just thoughts going forward.
What are you going to be watching? What are you going to be paying attention to?
Honestly, I just feel like politics and news in general and like any updates, there's a lot of things I think that we're going to have to obviously you're talking about the Senate and the House. So that's something to pay attention to, but I'm just kind of trying to see what's happening and I'll react from there. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm keeping my eye on JD Vance. I like watching him pre-vice presidential debate and post is scary. Yeah. I think that is scary. And I think that what's most likely going to happen is I think JD Vance is going to run after Trump. Yeah. That's my prediction. And that's really so I'm keeping my eye on that. And then also just another thing that I've noticed is that like, especially like Trump voters like our age seem to be like embarrassed of their vote. I've like noticed that like strongly, where like people who supported Trump are like don't want to talk about it or feel like, and like to some degree I get that. I understand that, but it's also like frustrating to watch someone vote for someone they don't really believe in or they're ashamed of. And I'm like, if you believe in Trump, then you should say that you believe in Trump. I don't think you should vote for a candidate that you're like ashamed of. And I think that that's been also frustrating for my age. So hopefully that goes away. Hopefully that's a concept that I don't know, dies out. But yeah, I think I like to remain hopeful in all this stuff. I mean, like the power you have does not end at voting.
That's right.
You know, you can go out, protest. That's how so many things have changed in this country. It's through protest, and there are things like unions where you force like the people in power to listen to you and give you power as well. So, yeah.
One of the things I'm going to encourage, not just you two, but any young person, especially any young person who's in higher education, is go out and start reading and listening to some thinkers that come from things from the opposite side that you do, right? You will gain a better understanding of how other people are perceive events that are going on. If you find the right folks, you'll gain the best of those insights, not the worst. In other words, you'll find people who are not simply trying to generate outrage and get people upset about things, but they're honestly trying to analyze things, and they're just coming from a different framework with you. One of the things that I've done over the last couple of years that I think has been really helpful, and I listen to podcasts more than I do anything else. I do some reading of different folks, but and I've tried to incorporate some podcasts I listen to that are people that they come from a perspective that I just really don't have, but it's helped me understand that perspective. And it's helped influence how other things perceive what's going on in the world. And I think if you don't do that, if you don't ever listen to those folks, you're going to constantly, when things go like they have in 2024, you're going to be, how did we get here? How did this happen? And if you will have a better understanding of that if you'll do that.
Yeah, I think that's also really important for the younger generation, because even after the election results, everybody was just like going crazy about it on both sides, really. And I feel like our generation has a hard time, especially like the side that I come from, more progressive. We have a hard time grasping why the other side votes the way they do and how they see the things they do. And so I feel like if we had just like a better and broader understanding of both sides and their issues and how they see the issues and how it affects them, then they could, have more empathy and more grace for that person or whatever, even though you may disagree and you may vote a certain way, which that's valid. So, yeah.
And it will make you more persuasive as well, right? When you're trying to advocate. Thank you both for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Anything else you want to wrap up with? No? This has been a great episode. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We want to remind you that
democracy is not a spectator sport.
Next time.
Hey everyone, this is Deborah, the resident Gen Z member of the Not My Generation podcast family. Not My Generation is produced in the Possibilities Inc. studio. This episode was produced by Lauren Peaches Keller. It was edited by Santiago Ramones. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Send a voice memo to notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu and you could hear your voice on an upcoming episode. If you liked today's episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and sharing the podcast with others. You can check out previous episodes on any podcast app and on our podcast website at notmygeneration.captivate.fm, where we also provide our show notes. And remember, you can follow Not My Generation on X, formerly known as Twitter, at NMG Podcast, and on Facebook at Not My Generation Podcast. We look forward to interacting with you soon.